Good evening. I'm Armando Valdez. I'm Assistant Professor of Management and Healthcare from the School of Business. And Christy, I think we had a conversation before the semester, sent out an email, and she said, how about giving a faculty lecture again? You haven't given one in a while. And I believe the dates, listen to me already, Freudian slip. The dates that were available were the last two in April. And I saw April 15th there, tax day, okay? So it inspired me to come up with the topic of what we should talk about and discuss on this evening. Before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of background on myself. I'm from the San Luis Valley, a little community called Capitalism, which hopefully most of you know about. I want to preface tonight's talk with thinking about the community of Pinellas County and specifically La Jara. There was a big fire in La Jara today, lost an apartment building. I heard there were no injuries, but a lot of people are going to be displaced. So if you would keep those people in your thoughts and prayers, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of community support, but if anything does come up, that you work to support either Red Cross or those individuals who are in need of help. And so moving on from there, but that is my home community. I'm very proud of that. Went to Satari High School, where I knew I wanted to go into business. Want to make money. And from that, I pursued a business degree at Adams State for 2 years before I transferred on to Colorado State University. And once I got to Colorado State, I had to look at picking an emphasis area. So I picked management and finance. Fascinated in both. And in my finance option, there was a lot of economics. And so I took a lot of those economics courses. I took even more than what was required out of finance, just because I had a fascination with it. Thought I might go into commercial banking, lending somewhere along time. It taught me that I don't want to go into commercial lending or banking after that. But it also gave me a wide perspective of how our economy works, how world economies work, how the structures impact all of us, either as citizens of a society, as customers, and as people who need resources, and how we distribute resources, how people gain wealth, and how people have more wealth than others, especially in our society, and then how other societies thrive as well. So that's part of where this comes from today. It's a personal interest I have of mine. I have some economics background, and it's something I want to continue to pursue in terms of how do we improve resource distribution throughout our societies. Because that's really what economics is, the study of how resources are distributed through our societies. I will also preface my talk with tell you that I'm grounded in theories by John Maynard Keynes. So if I were an economist, I would be considered a Keynesian economist. For those of you who don't know who John Maynard Keynes is, he was a very innovative individual, came out with theories which contradicted a lot of the thought at the time, in the latter 1800s, early 1900s, when most of his work was completed, or when his life period came. And so at the time, Adam Smith, who was one of the prominent economists for the United States, developed this idea of free markets. So you put yourself in a late 1700s, mid 1700s context, and there was a lot of monarchies at the time. Kings controlled the society, kings controlled the economy, kings controlled the wealth. And so to come up with the concept of free markets and an invisible hand was pretty innovative, novel. It's part of our lives today and very entrenched into our lives today. We don't think about it. We go out, walk out the door, we want something, we go purchase it or exchange if we have the means to do so. It's very common for us, but at the time, that was not the concept, okay? And so those thoughts were prevalent for a while until John Maynard Keynes was one of an influential group of individuals who said, now wait a second, okay? Free markets are good. He wasn't opposed to competition. But he also said we have to promote a fair and, I don't know if his words, but I would say some aspect of moral capitalism in there. Because free markets in and of themselves can become overbearing, overwhelming, and greedy, as we see sometimes in our society. Some aspects of what he talked about too that I want you to keep in mind for our discussion today. Investment, if investment exceeds savings, you're going to have inflation. Because there's a lot more money out there investing, and so prices are going to start going up. But as savings exceeds investment, you're going to have recession. Your economy is going to slow down, and it's going to have a crunch. Okay, so that's part of what I'm grounded in there. There was another economist or part of the economists at the time looked at that supply creates demand. Say's law. Supply creates demand. Keynesian countered that. He said, demand creates supply. That he argued that if markets, individuals had a need or a want for something, that somebody on the supply side would step in to meet that demand. Versus the thinking that which was prevalent at the time, that supply provided products and people came and purchased what was available. Okay? And let's see what else. He said that economies will fluctuate, especially national economies. Nothing stays good forever, and we don't stay in the dumps forever either. So we go through cycles, economic cycles. So as we talk about this, I want you to think about my perspective of where I'm coming from, and it's grounded in some of those theories. Okay? Any questions to this point? All right, well, let's hit it. So American debt. Are we maxed out? Thinking about this title, there's a lot of discussion around what the American debt is. Is it too much? How much do I hold personally? Are my children going to have to pay it back? There's a lot of discussion and concepts about what the American debt consists of. And so my perspective tonight is to hopefully offer you more insight and hopefully a desire to go find out more information about what is truly out there. Because I believe there's a lot of myth that's perpetuated in that discussion and a little bit of substantive truth that's actually discussed about our debt. Okay? So let's talk about our economy. First of all, these are some terms I want to get you familiar with. If you don't know them, we're going to get you familiar with them. First of all, gross domestic product. It's how economies are measured. It's the production of all goods and services produced. Bless you. So, anytime you produce any type of product, so for example, if you're a mechanic and you work on a car and you do that in exchange for money, some type of exchange, you've added to GDP. I'm a farmer and a rancher. I raise cattle, I raise sheep, I raise alfalfa, raise barley, raise hay. I produce those, and anytime I exchange those to one of my customers, demand, I contribute to GDP. Here at the university, several of you that I see in the crowd are employees here. You get a job, you get money for producing that job. Students come here, they contribute to GDP. We take our salaries, we go spend it elsewhere, that contributes to GDP. So there's several different aspects that contribute to GDP, but it's the best measure that we have, the most predominant measure we have of measuring economies. Okay? Most predominant. And looking at GDP, which is highlighted there, the United States economy this year will surpass $18 trillion in its economy. Okay? And as another part of gross domestic product, it's not exact. We don't know exactly what it is. It's the best estimate or guesstimate that economists can come up with the size of an economy of what it produces. Interesting story. Alan Greenspan, who was the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, we'll talk about the Federal Reserve here shortly, they control monetary policy, and part of monetary policy is how much money should be circulating out there in an economy at any given time. Some people would say that that person who holds that role now is held by Dr. Janet Yellen, who's the current Federal Reserve chair of the Federal Reserve, is the most important person in the world because of the influence the dollar has around the world. Maybe not so much today because there's been the growth of the euro, there's been a growth of the Chinese economy, but especially in the mid-90s when the United States was flourishing, growing, Alan Greenspan was a rock star because he did have a lot of influence on not only the United States, but every place the dollar had impact. So people would always wonder, what is Alan Greenspan thinking? What is he doing? They have stories that he'd go to a restaurant, and people would want to see what part of the paper he's reading, or what is he looking, or what's his conversation about, trying to anticipate decisions he might make or influence as part of the Federal Reserve. Obviously, they're not just his. but he has a tremendous amount of influence as the chair. So when he retired, or maybe shortly before he retired, he talked about, as a way of calculating GDP and anticipating if economies were going to grow, he looked at cardboard box manufacturing. Because he anticipated, as a part of his analysis, that if more businesses were ordering cardboard boxes, they were using that to packing, they anticipated more sales to ship out, and that was a precursor to growth in the larger economy. So one little tidbit of how he's looking to anticipate how the economy can grow or contract. So if those sales went down, then you know, okay, we're in trouble. And they look at other aspects. We look at the housing market, we look at automobile sales, we look at retail sales as aspects of looking at a GDP. So that's just a little bit of background. Budget deficit. On an annual basis, we look at, do we spend more or do we spend less than what we bring in revenue? If we spend more than what we bring in revenue, we have a deficit. If we bring more, or we bring in more revenue than we spend, we have a surplus. Tell my students they probably have more deficits than they do surpluses right now. But it changes around. That's why they're coming to college, because they're going to change that around as a part of it. National debt is an accumulation of more deficits than surpluses as an aggregate. The quantity of those deficits are larger than any surpluses we bring in. If we didn't have any deficits, we wouldn't have any debt, potentially, because we'd have more surpluses to be able to pay that off. Quiz question. I know. This is tough. I know. This is a lecture. You're going to get the same thing my students do. Has the United States ever been debt-free?
Yes.
Yes, okay. How often has the United States been debt-free?
Well, as recently as Clinton, I don't know if he was.
No. So Marty says the 90s too. I think you're thinking 90s too, right?
I was thinking the 90s also.
So in the 90s, we had a budget surplus, but we still carried debt. So that's a big misconception people have too. They confuse debt with surplus or deficit. Okay? So we had for a few years, about 3 or 4 years, I think from 1997, 99, and a little bit 2000, we had surplus. Actually paid down the debt. Hadn't done that in a long time. Before it's been debt increasing rather than paying it down.
We've been paying it down since World War II.
Well, we pay it, but it's been increasing. So during every time it's been increasing, that's the only time where we actually had debt going down a little bit rather than increasing at a faster pace. Does that make sense?
Well, unless it's debt as a percent of GDP.
Okay, we'll talk about that as well. But since and I have a graph as well, to show that debts have increased. And that was the one time where we started to pay that down, and then debts came back again. Okay? So was there a time? Well, we said yes. There was a time we were debt free. When?
When was that?
Well, okay, not to
Okay,
say
a little
that
bit later.
Clinton had anything to do with it, but during his administration, we were debt-free.
No. We had debt,
We had debt.
but we were making more money than we were spending. So we had a surplus. Well, we had a surplus. Probably still, when Clinton was around, we probably still had about $5 trillion in debt. Yeah, at that time.
Why wasn't inflation at that time?
Well, because people confuse surplus or deficit with debt. So we were making more money. We had more money coming into the Treasury than we were spending during those years. But we still had debt from the past. There was one time in history, 1835. Andrew Jackson, who's on the $20 bill, was president. It lasted 1 year. Only time that we were debt-free. Okay? Even when we first became a country, we carried debt. Because prior to that, each of the individual states held debt that they owed somebody. And at the time, our founding fathers had the discussion, we're a new nation now, should we wipe all those debts clear? And they said no. We made obligations to repay. We're a new nation. We have to build a credit worthiness or a credit history. We are going to pay our debts. So Andrew Jackson, he ran on as a platform. He did not like a central bank, and he did not like the national debt. Those were probably the two greatest things that he thought were the most evil in our society. So he paid down the debt. Guess what happened? Think about the time, 1835, there starts to be this expansion out west. All this land, federal government has, starts selling it off. People are needing money. Well, now the government doesn't start to infuse any investment into the country. There becomes this crunch for cash, to have the cash available. So this real estate market busts, kind of like we saw a few years ago. We had this crash. That is the longest depression that the United States has ever had. Lasted for 6 years. Longer than the Great Depression in the 30s. People don't realize that. We weren't a large society. We don't have a lot of media at that time. But that was our longest, most severe depression. And a lot of people will attribute it to because we paid off the debt and didn't invest in our economy. Okay? Only time. Economic expansion. When our economy, our GDP, grows from the previous quarter, we have economic expansion. It gets larger, more goods and services are produced. Economic contraction is when you have less. The economics is simple, right? Just more or less on the whole thing. We need Goldilocks approach. You're not too much, not too little, just right. That's what we need, just right there. So when we look at this, a recession, the technical definition is 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. Rarely do we have that. Even though they talk about the Great Recession that we've been in, we were actually growing. There was actually expansion. It was just so little. 0.1, 0.3, 0.5. Robust growth for an economy is around 4%. Doesn't seem very much, but it's a huge amount, especially when you talk about the United States economy, which is around $18 trillion. Okay? Any questions on those terms before we go on?
One question here on that
Yes, sir.
gross domestic product. I noticed in the news, they have it at 1.5, maybe 2 at the most. And this has been going on for several quarters.
For what it grows, correct. It does grow about 1.5 and 2%, but that's pretty good. That's moderate. If 4 is great, 2% is good. It's good. First quarter, they expected for 2015 a 4% growth year. They expect a really big year. First quarter ending March 31st, 0. 0 growth. 0 growth. So influences to our economy we have to think about. First of all, Adam Smith is still in effect. Free markets. Supply and demand factors that are out there. Competitive aspects. People out there say, I got an idea that people want. They go out and produce it. Have you guys watched those infomercials? I stay up late, watch those. You know, the Sticky Buddy? The one that you can clean yourself and take, spouse hair, mouse hair, or whatever off, and you wash it, dry it, and it works again. That's an idea. Or this Yoshi mat. This is my new crave. I want this Yoshi mat you put on a grill, and you put meat on it, vegetables and everything, and it leaves grill marks, cooks them without the flare-ups, burning them and everything. That's gross domestic product. We get products people want to buy. That's part of that free market system. Demand and supply. I don't know how you do without it. I don't know how you do either. There's legislative influences, which are really key. Legislative influences are political influence. This is Congress coming in, or whoever gets elected as president coming in. But Congress has a large part to do with this because they set tax policy, IRS enforcement. Today, the United States is going to bring in $3 trillion in taxes this year. Maybe more. I think that was an estimate from 2014. $3 trillion. A sixth of our overall economy. That's a huge amount of money. And people think that the Treasury brings it in one shot on April 15th. There's actually 4 filing periods or contribution periods that people can make, or some businesses are required to make. And Bill, you might have to help me here. April 15th, January 15th, October 15th?
June and September 15th.
June and September 15th, thank you. June and September 15th. 4 times when money comes into the Treasury. But they kind of get money all the time. Every time they get my paycheck, they withhold for Medicare, and they withhold for my federal taxes. They kind of get it a little bit every time we get paid. But that's part of the economic governance through the Federal Trade Commission over supply and demand, which Keynesian also said there has to be government intervention for an economy to be working at its full capacity. Versus Adam Smith, who said government's got to stay out of it. Invisible hand. Competing perspectives there, competing theories. And then finally, there's administrative influences, administrative agencies, which are out of the executive branch, president's branch, Federal Reserve. So Federal Reserve is called, people have horrible things say about the Federal Reserve. It's a scam, it's a bunch of rich people taking our money, all kinds of things. Technically, whatever you want to believe, I'm going to leave it up to you to go find more information. The Federal Reserve is a quasi-public institution. It's operated as a private enterprise owned by the federal government. And I do believe it. I'm not saying they do everything right, but I do believe that. Okay? So those are some of our influences. Any comments or questions on our influences? You guys are just excited to get to the next part. Mr. Gonzalez, yes?
One question. Does the Federal Reserve have the right to flood the market with money, or?
Yes.
They do.
Because they set monetary policy. Monetary policy determines how much money we need to have in our economy at any time. And they have three ways of doing that. First of all is through the interest rate. If interest rates go down, it's cheaper to borrow money. Most people think that money is made by the printing presses. It's not. Most money is made by people going out and getting loans, swiping their credit card. That creates money supply. Okay, so that's first of all. Second one is the reserve requirement of banks. Banks are required to hold a certain amount of cash or deposits without lending it out. So if you lower that amount, then you can lend more out. Versus if you have a higher reserve requirement, you can loan less out, which contracts the money supply.
But I understood that the Federal Reserve can only print money whether they're replacing old currency.
No.
Or the gross domestic product has gone up.
No.
No?
No. Monetary policy is set and discussed through, because a lot of it's not the presses. Remember, a lot of it's not the presses. When we create money when I buy property from you and I go take out a loan to pay for that property, I just created money in the money supply. And they have distinction between M1 money supply, M2 money supply, M3 money supply, which has different distinctions. But that's the part about monetary policy. We do not have a fixed set of money that we say should be part of our monetary policy. The Federal Reserve's job, as in their mission, is to maximize employment and to keep inflation moderate. They don't want to keep it as low and they don't want to keep it too high, they want to keep it moderate. That's part of what they say. Okay, that's part of their mission. I'm sorry?
Define moderate.
Moderate inflation in a healthy economy would probably be somewhere around 2.5%, 3.5%. Growth in value, you want growth in value products. We don't like inflation because you don't get additional value in the product, but they're hoping people strive for that. They can see that there's more money out there. If there's no growth, people get discouraged, don't try, those type of things, leads to complacency, lots of different factors that go along with that. Any other questions? So here's the first graph. It's tough finding these graphs. There's a lot of different graphs that are skewed out there. So I just want to show you from when you look at down into the early 1960s, middle part of the 20th century, you see it shoot up. 80s it really shoots up compared to what it was at the time. Then it really shot up again, even in the 90s, and we were paying it down just a little bit right here. You see that little dip? Tiny dip. You can see that little tiny dip right there, and then it starts to go up again to where, for the first time, we had $18 trillion. The other first time that we had last year is that the debt exceeded GDP. Before, GDP exceeded debt. Okay, we're going to talk about that as well. I just want to show you the graph, how it shoots up to the $18 trillion. So the reason why it says million right there, it's 18 million with 6 zeros behind it. You got to add 6 more zeros. See, another misleading aspect. I just want to, I just want you to see this. I want you to see this. Whoop, right, straight up. How it goes like that. That's a big part of it. So where is that debt held? Looking at our outstanding debt within the Treasury, you have debt held by public and you have intergovernmental holdings for a total, as at the end of March 31st, 2015, $18,152 billion. Okay? But this is going to be a key thing right here when it says debt held by public. This is marketable securities that are out there available to people to buy. And then there's this $5 trillion that isn't. And this is where people also don't understand about the debt. So out of that 18 trillion, 13 trillion is truly our debt. This $5 trillion is really in a savings account for Medicare trust, Social Security trust in the future, which is a debt. They got to pay people back. But if something happens that we die, they don't have to pay that back. Let's hope we don't die. Yeah, let's hope we don't die. Be good citizens, or maybe we won't ask for it. Yeah, we'll be good citizens and say, no, I don't need my Social Security. I don't need my Medicare as a part of it. But that's a big factor that people don't understand. People think, oh, that 18 trillion, it's all held by China. It's not. Yeah, Saudi Arabia. Yes, there you go. And actually, from a foreign standpoint, it's not even a majority of our debt. You know, it's not even a majority of our debt. Now, they do buy, you look at T-bills that are there, those are short-term, 1 year or less. And then you have notes and bonds, which are longer-term, held there. So, you know, but they have terms, that's the other thing too. It doesn't all come due at one time. It doesn't all come due tomorrow. It doesn't all have the same terms. They've been issuing bonds, T-bonds and T-bills for a long period of time that are 20 years out, 30 years out. I still hold one that's, I think it's still 20 years. That I should be able to cash in close. I think I got it for my college. I haven't been out of college 20 years yet, but it's coming close. I'm looking forward. I'm holding that bond, just waiting to see how much interest I'm going to get on it. That were the big interest days. I think I was getting 4 or 5% at that time. Yeah, that's big money today. We don't know what that is. You also see state and local government series aspects, which are in the non-marketable aspect. These are non-marketable in the secondary market, but they are sold by the Federal Reserve for Adams State. As a part of it, remember when we did the capital fee project here on campus? We passed the capital fee for students. They took that passing, or that vote, went up and sold bonds so we could do the renovations now. Because we didn't generate enough money on the capital fee to do all the renovations that we saw today. You know, with McDaniel Hall, and the dorms, and the bubble, and I think some of the what else did we do? The music we did. You know, Richardson, I think Richardson Grant. I don't know if that was capital fee, but anyway.
Business.
No, business wasn't part of it. That was prior to it. So in looking at that, that's where some of these state and local government municipal bonds come from at that point. So really, when you look at it, it's this $13 million that's a big focus. You take this chunk out of it, well, it doesn't look as bad, right? Or is it like putting lipstick on a pig?
Yeah.
Look a little better at that point. It's still debt, okay? It's still debt. So this is our fiscal picture that we've seen. And so we're saying fiscal picture, we're looking at annual budgets. So we're talking about deficits and surpluses. This is not debt. This is spending and revenues. So the United States bringing in $3 trillion now. If we have a deficit, it's because we spend more than $3 trillion. Look at it in 1985. At this point in time, we had a deficit. You see that spending was higher than revenues we brought in. Then we come to the point that Mr. Gonzalez was talking about in, late 97, 98. President Clinton, you know, as I say, everyone has a president. President Clinton was my president. It's exciting during that time. There's this expansion in GDP because of all the technology growth. It seemed like the most exciting time in my history. Things were great. I thought the world was most peaceful as it could be. I guess there was Kosovo and those type of things. Those were peripheral, right? Compared to especially what we think about terrorism now. It was a good time. And I think he did the best thing for the country by distracting Congress. To where they couldn't intervene and mess up, you know, with their tax policies and their legislative actions, because they were so focused on him for a couple years. And look what happens if you don't have government intervention. That's contrary to what I believe with my Keynesian theory. So maybe Adam Smith was right. You have an invisible hand. We start growing like crazy.
Well, it turns out the hand wasn't invisible.
Good point. Good point. But we had a period of time when we did make more money. And then look what happened. You know, we fell back into this.
Well, one thing he did was he almost shut down the military.
And that's how he slowed down spending. Correct. But remember, the perspective of time during that time was that it was more peaceful.
But he raised taxes also. And
He raised taxes, which brought in more revenues. You're exactly
there
right.
is when-
You're exactly right. I'm sorry?
Or was he lucky that we had peace at the time?
I think there's a large part of luck. I think there's a large part of luck, but I think there's a large part of, you know, it's part of strategy. If you're able to decrease some of it and with spending, and those parts are the debatable aspects, which is why we have challenges here and here. We all believe, you know, what should be spent on, and what tax policies we should have, what revenues we had. Do you know after the Great Depression, you know what some tax rates were? 94% was the highest. One person paid, I think it was Rockefeller. One person paid. 88% was the next tier. I was looking at tax brackets today. They go up to a 35 point some percent and down. Is it 39 now? 39%? Thank you. And in looking at that, completely different in terms of strategy, people, the wealthy got taxed a lot higher than what they do today.
That's why times were so good.
And times were good, is that what you said? Well, there was definitely a need to rebuild the country. And I don't know, going back to the context, obviously before all our times, was there an aspect of moral capitalism? I don't know if J. Rockefeller really wanted to pay that 94%, but he knew he could make investment if we had a thriving economy. And maybe he fought it to the death, I don't know. Does anyone know? I don't know about J. Rockefeller. Or not J, it was John D. Rockefeller, was it John D. Rockefeller? Jay's is like grandson, great nephew or something in Congress. Okay, but let's come back to our fiscal position. So you see this spending increase, and it kind of takes this straight line almost. You can see this gradual aspect. Spending follows it at a lesser rate, then it kind of takes a spike here for a lot of the reasons. Higher tax rates, lower spending on aspects like military, absolutely. Then we go into this lull, and part of the reason we go into this lull is that economic cycles again. We were recession before this, had some economic growth, comes back, tax policies were changed here to where they were reduced for the greatest period of time during President Reagan's time period. Then we have voodoo economics, and you start seeing this gap right here. There's this lull, part of that recession. Prior to that, a little more spending, a little less revenues, because remember, if economies don't do too well, people don't make as much money, the taxes don't come in as well, because it's based upon a percentage of what you make. And people start doing really good, economies grow, and there is a spike there as a part of that reason, and then wow, look at all this revenue, right at this point. And we stay pretty close up until that point right there. If this doesn't occur, this spending, look at this gap between right there. Okay?
Armando, can I ask a question? What's taking place there then?
Okay.
Where's the debt?
So this right here, we'll talk about debt in a second, but that right there is when we had the mortgage and the housing crash as a part of it. You remember that banks that were failing left and right, and one of the big ones was AIG, which was sponsoring a lot of those mortgage insurance for the banks. So banks were insuring you, if you had a mortgage during that time, that you wouldn't pay. And they never thought that so many people would default on their mortgage in one concentrated period of time to where it almost broke the system. It's an insurance pool that's out there, and the people that defaulted were greater than the pool that was available. So think about this. If we don't do this spending right here, this spike in spending, because look at the revenues, how they drop because of the economy, how it's doing so bad. People are unemployed. They're not making money, so the revenues go down. We don't do that. Does the United States collapse right at that point if we don't have that spending? That's a question to ponder.
Now, is that public debt or government
This
debt?
is public spending.
At the
This
time?
is government budget deficit. You're correct. It's deficit. It's not debt. It's deficit. There's some debt 'cause we had to take out more debt to spend it because we didn't have the money. So when you don't have money, you start swiping your credit card. Well, hopefully not your credit card because that's high interest rate. But you start going out and getting loans and something. You try to find money elsewhere because you don't have it personally. And the government is somewhat similar. If they don't have the money, they've got to get this gap from someplace. Okay? We were on the brink of collapse, and I don't think people realize it. People think, oh, it was just a rough time. But because we had FDIC, which covered people, because we had a Federal Reserve, which helped broker the sale of banks so people weren't left out in the cold, we survived it, came back. And there was this huge spike right here, but look, I think President Obama gets a little bit of a bad rap. It hasn't been increasing or gouging completely, but he's maintained high levels and they stayed there. When spending spiked, it stayed there, and then it's somewhat leveled off. It hasn't been this spike up, spike up, spike up at that point. And so that's part of, again, our fiscal picture, bringing it back down. We're not having this wide gap. This gap right here is wider than these right here, but hopefully we're starting to bring it a little bit closer because our economy has improved. It's growing again, except for maybe the first quarter of this year. But it's growing, it's doing better. So revenues are coming back. But it's something that a government does that individuals do not do. Is when things get going bad, what do we, especially from an economic perspective, what do we as individuals have the nature to do? Not spend. And so it comes back to that Keynesian principle. When savings, or not spending, exceeds investment or spending, you have a recession. And so you get back to that recession, it's hard times for all. So you need someone to spend to kind of invigorate the economy again. And that's the role that government plays. again, my perspective, my lecture, so I can stand here and tell you what I think, right? And you can agree or disagree, but part of the facts support what I'm talking about. Spending does help keep our economy going, okay? And if no one else is spending, that's where the government comes in. So here's another thing that we won't talk about tonight, because we're running out of time, actually. Balanced budget amendment is a big discussion. And we felt it here in Colorado. When we had Tabor pass, that kind of said, hey, you can't spend more than just a little bit of inflation among what you bring in revenues. If you take a drop like this, which we did in Colorado back around 2000 when the tech economy burst, we've been struggling ever since. And then we've had to go back to the legislative process and pass referendum C to give us a break or a window from it. And how complicated that comes instead of the federal government being able to step in and help out the situation. So think about that. In a balanced budget, I'll let you make a decision on that, but my personal perspective is I'd be wary of a balanced budget. Because in this case, it hurts. Hurts bad. Yes, sir?
Because people who balance budget say, well, as individuals, we can't do that, and why they think an individual family and the government are the same.
Not the same.
I think
They're not the
they miss
same.
a little bit.
Individuals work off a fixed resource base. The United States can print its own money, not fixed. I'm not saying it's good. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. But it's not a fixed resource base the same way. Okay, let's continue going on. So let's adjust spending, or let's adjust our fiscal situation, deficits versus surpluses, compared to GDP. So this is comparing the size of our economy versus how much we're spending and a percentage of that. So back to the early 80s. 22 jumped up to a little bit above it, and then came back down and everything. We had that nice period in the 90s, back again. The blue's always good. And then we start spending more than what we had. Then we had this huge spike, what we just talked about. Jumped up to 24%, and look, it's worked its way down to where it's almost back to 20%. So as a percentage of our economy and how it's grown, we're actually not doing too bad. If you measure this gap to some of these gaps back in the 80s, we're doing better during this period of time. And this is what people don't take into context. It's the economy, stupid. Isn't that what my president, I think, said once upon a time? It is the economy. So as long as we're betting on the United States doing well and growing, we're going to continue not to be as in bad shape as we think we are, as we talk about a lot of times. We're actually doing pretty good. Now this was rough. And this is what people don't see. It's tough to fight on something, or how do I say, advocate on something that didn't happen. That didn't happen. You can't say, well, this could have happened. Well, it's coulda, shoulda, woulda. If it would have happened, we'd all be crying. But it didn't happen, which is good. We don't want it to happen. We don't want those things to happen. Okay? So who do we owe the money to? Tough to find this too. That's why the other ones, the actual Federal Reserve debt portfolio. This is a little more graphical that's put together. It's talking about the Federal Reserve, but it comes from an independent site that put it together. Wall Street Journal, something, I can't remember what the source was. I just found it on the images to kind of give you an idea. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's also pretty reflective of what's out there. First of all, who holds our debt? U.S. individuals and institutions. If you have a bondholder like I do, you're part of that 29%. If you're a pension company, or a pension fund, you go out and buy U.S. bonds and T-bills to help mitigate your risk, because they're guaranteed. They're practically guaranteed. The United States has been around for how long? Another quiz question. Not quite. 239 years. 239 years. They have never, ever defaulted on a debt. That's why we talked about the legislative policies a few years ago when we almost, they had that showdown. Are we going to pass a budget to pay the debt and everything? We almost defaulted? Why do we want to do that? We don't need to do that. Why do we want to risk our credit history? Because we have 239 years of not paying. Okay? Next, Social Security Trust Fund. That's part of that $5 trillion we had there. The Federal Reserve, 13.8%. They go out and they'll buy T-bonds and T-bills to help the economy. Because if people start, if people start getting lower yields, like for example, too many people buy them, the yields start going down, they don't become as attractive. And so the Federal Reserve says, hey, wait a second, 'cause remember, T-bills are bought, but then they're traded on the secondary market, okay? And so they go and buy them and they hold them. So then there's less out there available, supply and demand, for the people, which increases yields, okay?
No, wouldn't that increase the price and drop the yield?
So if they go out to the open market,
But that puts money into circulation because you're not holding. a
correct.
T-bill.
But by buying them themselves, they're creating demand. Well, that still would increase the yield. That would decrease the yield because it creates competition as a part of this.
That's what
They
happens.
go out as a part of it. They go out as a part of those operations to control and fluctuate the market, but there isn't too much and too little.
And I thought they were
As a
going to
part.
buy them from banks. The banks had money instead of T-bills, and they had money to lend rather than investments.
Well, remember too, they also don't want to push people towards T-bills and T-bonds. So it is, right. So if they do push the prices up, yields down, okay, then people go start looking for a more attractive investment. So they go out to the private market, they go into private bonds, exactly. Some like could be junk bonds, which are really high. But yes, that's a good point. So it does push yields down because they want to push investment elsewhere into the private sector, okay? So that's a big part of their operations. You have China, which is always a big one. 8.2%. They own about 1.2 trillion, and them and Japan go back and forth between who owns the most. 2 years ago, Japan had more because China sold some to Japan. So you had a fluctuation back and forth. The Chinese do not own us. The Chinese do not have the national sand dunes as collateral for this. There's people who talk like that we own. The federal government is owned by the Chinese because of this, because it holds so much of our debt. Altogether, a lot of foreign governments do hold part of our debt. They probably hold about 6 trillion. You know, which is a significant amount of money in public debt. It's almost half of that 13 trillion that's there. Debt of other countries, though, you see Greece have had a lot of problems recently. They're out of as a percentage of their GDP. Look, the United States is right here at about 88.3. They're 172. Yeah, we don't want to get there. You know, Japan. Look at Japan. Prosperous capitalist country, really high there. Go down. This was an Australian website. It's probably the best one I had. Down about 14.5%. But you know, we're not the worst in the world. We're kind of right in the middle.
Where's Canada at there?
Canada, they have Canada right there, 38%. So lower. And it's based upon policy that you have. Deficit attention, I just want to bring this, that economists actually predict that that deficits are going to decrease, and then they're going to increase back around 2022, 23, 24, 25. We'll see what happens. But a lot of things could change during that time. But this is actual right here. We have that huge gap that we saw again, but they can come down. Government spending, where does it go? First of all, a large part of this is mandatory spending, mainly on Medicare and Social Security. So that's a big part of that. Those are the entitlement programs they talk about. Defense, here, this is actually where we are right here. 3.8%, estimated might go down to 2.7 as a percentage of our GDP. Right here, you see some of the interest on the debt. As that debt increases, that is a problem. We're going to start paying more interest there. And then finally, non-defense, everything else. People say, oh, we got to stop giving money to other countries. We got to stop these other government programs. It's a small amount. Social Security, Medicare is some of our biggest spending. But remember, it's been paid into it. It's a savings account. We pay into it. And now, the baby boomers, however, which are some in this room, I won't identify who, and they started retiring in 2010. When they get to full retirement, all of them, they're our biggest population, will have less workers per person that's on Social Security or Medicare. Huge issue, okay? So should we be worried? It's kind of what you guys came tonight. So I'm going to give you 4 minutes on. Maybe 6, but if Christy doesn't give me the evil eye, I'll run over a little bit. Should we be worried? First of all, I said the United States has a 239-year-old credit history that never defaulted on. Who else can you say has that? There's no company, there's no bank, there's no other country that can give you that type of credit history. So why wouldn't you lend the U.S. government money? They're good for it. And they know they're good for it. That's why they pay the cheapest amount of debt, or for their debt, their interest on their debt. Interest is the price of money. How expensive is your money? And we live through a time of the cheapest money ever. It's what I know. Some of you probably remember back in the 70s, lots of inflation, interest rates high. I've heard people getting home mortgages, 18%. Crazy, maybe some in the 20s, depending on their credit worthiness. They don't have a 239-year history, okay? How about the revenue? $3 trillion. Now we spend a hell of a lot, so that's a big problem. With $3 trillion, man, we can start making up this money in a hurry. If we change some of our spending policies. Spending is an issue too, like anyone. You can't spend more than what you bring in constantly, unless you're the U.S. government with that. They leverage that 239-year-old history, don't they? Assets, man. Let's start talking about balance sheet of the U.S. government. I talked about the sand dunes a little bit. Well, that's just one thing. Let's talk about the whole San Juan Mountains. Or let's talk about all the federal buildings and equipment and defense aspects that they have. Assets they have there. Not to mention offshore and government oil reserves, which they estimate to be, with today's prices, which are pretty low, $130 trillion. $130 trillion. You hear what I said?
But with global warming, we can't burn it, so.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
Right.
That could change the market of fossil fuels in a hurry. But it's not the way it is right. It's the way it is right now. And when President Nixon took us off the gold standard, we still have all that gold. What do people do when they freak out that they think currency's falling, dollars falling? What do? They go buy gold. They gold. The United States has lots of gold. I think we're estimated. It varies depending on gold price. Gold was high for a while. I don't know why we don't sell the gold. I don't know why we keep it. We hoard it away. But we have a lot of gold, almost $1 trillion worth of gold. So right there, lots of assets. The United States, for the debt-to-asset ratio, it's minuscule. It is minuscule. So if I got into that commercial lending, or personal bank, or whatever it is, someone walked in with that type of balance sheet and that type of debt-to-asset ratio, man, I wouldn't think about it. Yeah, that'd be A credit paper. A-grade paper right there as a part. Even with the revenue they bring in. So you have a spending problem. We want to look at this, but you got to bring that in. U.S. economy, $18 trillion, largest in the world. Kind of a question mark there because last year China passed us in purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity is one of those that can be a little bit confusing because if you look at nominal economy, bless you. China has about a $13 trillion economy. We have an $18 trillion economy, but they've grown rapidly. But this purchasing power parity is an interesting one. It says if you, like Mexico, the United States has a strength in purchasing power parity because things are cheaper over there because our dollar is worth more, so we can go buy more goods there. Okay? Well, the Chinese, they devalue their currency. They peg it actually to the United States currency. So I don't quite trust this purchasing power parity that's listed. The United States is still a very strong economy, especially when we look at per capita wealth. Individuals here in the United States have a lot more wealth than the Chinese have per capita. Yes?
China's GDP most recent.
Well, if you look at purchasing power parity, which measures currency to currency, theirs is probably about 18.2, 18.3 trillion. We're about 18. If it's nominal, then there's about 13. 13 trillion to our 18, approximately. So we're ahead, but just about 10, 15 years ago, they were down like around 1, 2 trillion. Boom, they jumped up quickly. They're the second largest economy in the world. I still say we're the first. Maybe that's just my domestic U.S. pride, but I think we're still by far. Chinese are playing games with it. Some people buy into it. And then political decisions. What do future budgets look like? Public service needs that we have. Those are going to be where our spending needs go at this time. We see terrorism. We've talked about that. The world and many other places is engaged in conflict. To protect ourselves, are we going to build up a military? Are we going to try to work with social policy? Give them, to try to do it through diplomatic aspects, like what's happened with Iran and the United States, rather than go to war? I don't know. I don't know what that is, but those are key decisions that we have to look at. And what do we look at this fiscal policy of our spending versus our revenues as we come in? Do we tax more as part of it? The other thing I didn't bring up is how much share do we have individually of that debt? It's not held by us individually. Remember, the United States, unless you see the government as us, then we do hold it. But we don't have a personal obligation to pay it, although there is a site you can go to and make gifts to help pay down the debt. I wonder how many people they get. I was thinking, who the hell, who's that sucker out there? Yeah, there probably is some. I bet the president doesn't even do that, you know?
What's that rich investor that was encouraging to do exactly that?
Was it Warren Buffett?
Warren Buffett was-
Warren Buffett, though, very good, has moral capitalism. Bill Gates, moral capitalism. They make all this money and everything. Like Warren Buffett said, I'm giving a lot of this back.
Yeah.
Instead of hoarding it, and he's redistributing it kind of back. We don't have that same type of moral capitalism. We wouldn't need as many public service needs if we had more moral capitalism. If we had many of these rich corporations, companies, individuals to give more as part of moral capitalism, you wouldn't need the government to step in. But it's not profitable to help the homeless. It's not profitable to help disabled. Well, maybe in some cases. Maybe disabled is a bad example. But homeless, you know, other social needs that we have in our society, domestic abuse shelters, all like that, it's not profitable. People don't open up businesses and say, I want to charge you, you've been sexually assaulted, you know, you've been, had domestic violence, here, I'm going to charge you $50 to come to the shelter. There's not probably going to be much demand out there, so it's not profitable. So those become some of the needs that we have. Well, we do have some private and nonprofits that do step in and do that.
Some other countries around the world do treat the social issues a lot more important, and they do treat homelessness a lot more. Is it profitable for them in their specific economy?
It's not, it's probably prioritization.
It's more moral.
It's prioritization that as a society we said, you know, we need to spend more on the homeless and I don't know what we say less on, or I'm going to get taxed. Tax me an extra 5% and take that money and put it towards the homeless.
Okay.
Could be a different set of it's a different set of priorities. We're about wealth accumulation here. And I'm not saying everyone is, but there's a wealth accumulation. Yes, Judy?
What do you think about the guy that, and I don't know his name, but just decided that all his employees would get $70,000?
The
I haven't heard, I don't think I've heard about
It's
that.
a
Which one?
CEO out of Seattle, and I don't know what the company is. but
Moral
it was-
capitalism.
Moral capitalism.
Moral
He thought
capitalism.
that's the level, I guess, that everybody's happy at, and he's gonna decrease his millions, and everybody in
Yeah.
his company will make $70,000.
Moral capitalism. Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, when they were in operation, they sold out Sin to still the name Ben & Jerry's, but when Ben and Jerry were there, I believe they had a strong sense of moral capitalism. They said that the CEO,
For college education.
yeah, there you go. But the CEO of Ben, I don't remember if it was Ben or Jerry, said that CEO salary cannot be more than 10, 12 times the lowest paid worker. So if the CEO gets a raise, because there was a lot during that time of CEOs getting these huge raises while people are still earning minimum wage, if the CEO gets a raise, the lowest paid person gets a wage, or an increase in wage.
This guy that Judy's talking about, he's a multimillionaire, and he's giving his employees enough money that he and everyone else in his company will be making $70,000.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
and he's young, and I don't know what company.
There's
it is.
a
Anybody else does? I don't know
lot
what
of
company
to
it
that,
is.
and
Was it what?
I thought it was aviation, but I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I just heard a blip yesterday
It
or a
was
thing
in
on
the
the news.
news yesterday.
especially in an area like Seattle, which has a higher cost of living.
Yeah.
Now, we're seeing an issue where they raise the minimum wage to $15. It's a great case study, because remember, if you make labor more expensive, and we look at free markets, you could look for alternatives. You don't think so? Well, let's see what happens in Seattle.
They raised theirs to $9 5, 8 years ago. Other.
How's the Santa Fe economy done? I don't know how,
Raised theirs too.
I don't know how it's done, but it's a good case study. It's a good case study to
Well,
look at, to
take a
see
look
how
at
they do.
The United States, take a look at the states that have a higher than $7.50 minimum wage, and they're all doing better than those that only have
Okay.
a $7.50.
It's one aspect. We want to see what else are they doing. Are they investing more as well?
Well,
Are they putting more money? But exactly, John Maynard Keynes would say again, if we have maximum employment, people with more wages, what do they do with those wages? They take it out and they invest it and they spread it around. Correct. Which is why also with this spending, and Ben, I'll get to you in 1 second, if I can go back here. Where am I going? Do you remember when we got those $600 payments per person and $300 per dependent and everything? That was part of that spending, was to try to get people more money and put it back into the economy. What they found out though is that people's debt were as bad as the U.S. economy's debt, or the U.S. national debt, and they were taking that extra money and putting it into debt, paying debt. Ben?
Armando, quick question. And actually, if you could go back to that same chart. You know, so this idea of moral capitalism, how does that compare to a moral government? Because
Well, I think it goes with it.
in moments of recession, right, are moral capitalists, Bill Gates of the world, et cetera, as willing to spend as a government might be? Because
Interesting point. So you're saying
so as we see less-
that they would supplant government spending during those times, that the
Well,
businesses would spend? Am I hearing
I
that
think
right?
it
or
makes a
no?
lot of sense, you know, this moral capitalism, it's a good idea, and you see more and more of it, especially of people that are in the limelight and have a need to demonstrate that they're
Yeah.
doing good for society. I think you see less of it within the niches of companies that are making billions of dollars in profit, but they're not in this, you know, kind of limelight with a need to demonstrate moral capitalism.
And
But in moments of recession, what might happen to these moral capitalists that are, otherwise they have foundations and they're putting money back towards good deeds, education, et cetera, in society? What happens in that moment of recession to that spending amongst these moral capitalists?
it's like we see with individuals, they hold back. There's not as much money available for foundation. I've served on several nonprofits. There's not as many grants to go around during that time. It's a tough period of time for nonprofits because there weren't the same grant opportunities that there were before, which tells you some of that moral capitalism. Maybe it wasn't they were moral, is that they had a fear that, hey, wait a second, now I gotta look back and protect my wealth picture. And some of them lost their wealth picture because they made bad decisions, bad business decisions, bad business models during those times. And that's the challenge when we rely on just moral capitalism. There could be that fact that they want to be moral, they just don't have the resources there to do it. Whereas government has a possibility of really creating money.
And so
And pumping into the system.
In today's society, we've incentivized people to pay less taxes if they're participating in forms of moral capitalism. So is that an argument essentially that we should de-incentivize people and charge more taxes?
No, well, it depends on what you believe is part of the policy. If you believe that people don't have moral capitalism, you want to have taxes, so you take it out of their decision-making aspect, and then government controls it and supplants that role. If you believe in moral capitalism, you give them the incentives, so they put it into the economy, so you want to incentivize that more.
But when
Or
we
hopefully you wouldn't even have to incentivize it,
But
really.
when we most need moral capitalists, they're gone.
Potentially. Potentially. If you had strong individuals that had strong resource positions that had the means to give it out there, but that's the thing. Even with moral capitalists, you've got to include a whole lot of people together to match what the federal government can do. That's the part with moral capitalism that we have to struggle with and the challenge with, is that the resource position, even as rich as they are, aren't there. Collective wealth in the United States is about $85 trillion. The United States, we talked about having a resource position that could be higher than $150, $200 trillion. That's where the United States, and that's everybody, that means everyone would have to be moral capitalist.
Realize you're almost out of time, but I'm a little confused. Could you define moral capitalism for me?
Moral capitalism is still, earning profit through the free market aspect, but once you have those resources that are available, you're not thinking solely independently or solely selfishly. It's using a moral guide or a moral concept to help greater part of your community, greater part of your citizens, that you know that you made that money as a benefit of them. For example, should Walmart pay more taxes? Should Microsoft pay more taxes? Walmart, for sure, they got a whole lot of trucks run up and down the highways with a lot of wheels on them that impact those highways a lot more than me. And so moral capitalists say, yeah, we use this infrastructure more. And in using that infrastructure more, we should pay more. But can you leave it up to their own decision making? Let's say we don't have any taxes, and we're going to say, pay to society what you feel you should contribute for what you would have. How much of that $3 trillion do you think the United States would get today? And that's partly where we have a deficit in moral capitalism. Does that help answer it, Bill?
I understand
Okay.
what you're saying.
At least from my perspective.
Right, I understand your perspective.
Andy,
My last question, is a balanced budget a good thing?
I say no.
Okay.
For that reason right there, when we run into trouble, you need to infuse investment into your society. Sir?
Do you have any sense or feel of the percentage of the businesses or whatever that would fit into what you call moral capitalism? When you look in the news and you see all these companies wanting to go to Switzerland or Cayman Islands. Unfortunately, they don't go to my house, but, they don't want to have to pay taxes, so they're putting all their holdings and stuff in other countries. And so wait, I'm not done.
Yes, sir, please continue.
So do you have a feel for the percentage of companies or businesses that would fit into what you call moral capitalism? Do you think it's 50%, 3%?
It's a great question. I have to make my best educated guess.
Sure.
Or guesstimate on it. I'd say it's, geez, 0.5 of 1%. Of ones that could really make an impact, like the Warren Buffett, I mean two, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. But about all the CEOs, millionaires that have a true resource position, I think a lot of us in here, we're moral. I'm a moral capitalist, so it depends on how we want it. But I give, probably $5,000-6,000 a year, maybe to everything I give. It's small compared to where you talk about Warren Buffett, who's going to give him back 80-85% of his total estate. That's quite. So there's a continuum, and so we'd have to define maybe intervals or something with that moral capitalism to get to a true estimate of what we're looking at. How many people are true moral capitalists that give that 85% versus ones that, like myself, are giving 5-10%.
But you're giving.
But we're giving, and I think if you're talking about giving and moral capitalists, then I'd move that number way up. I'd start talking at about 60-65%.
And you're talking individuals, not companies. You were asking how many companies would.
Yeah.
I don't think any companies would, or.
I think there's some. I don't know about any, but I think it's a small
Well,
amount. I think it's the 1/2 of 1%, 1%. It's a
70,000 minimum salary to his employees.
It's a small number, but it's a very debatable number because it's tough to quantify what exactly. There's a lot of philanthropic aspects, but when you compare their philanthropy to what they actually make in a profit, what's the moral capitalist aspect to it? Sir?
Yeah, and I think when you talk about companies, what is so tough is publicly held companies.
Yeah.
Because then it's the investors, and how many millions of them are they? And are you going to take a vote at the board of directors to do something on that? I don't own any individual stocks, but if I owned a bunch of McDonald's stock, and I'm sitting there, would I support McDonald's workers making $9 an hour, $10 an hour, $12 an hour? I'd probably support that, as long as my stock dividends didn't go down on the other end. So what does that have to happen? There's the whole ripple effect. They have to continue market share, continue to grow, double the price of their burgers at the same time in order to do that, in order to come back and pay the dividends to all the investors. So then suddenly I'm thinking, my retirement is in McDonald's stock. Do I value someone else making $15 an hour, or do I value my dividend that's going to build my retirement? And that becomes the moral quandary that you get put into, and you multiply that by the hundreds of millions of investors in publicly held companies, and that becomes a very difficult decision.
The individual versus the collective.
Sure.
And very much a challenge with the moral capitalist would say, take some of my dividend, let's give it to them. Not all of it, because the first thing I teach in capitalism is make me money. You got to earn a profit, because if you're not profitable, you're not even around to do anything. But once you start making a profit, then there becomes this ethical and social responsible aspects that you have to make a decision on for your organization. A couple more comments, and then I'm happy to stick around if you guys want to continue the discussion. But as part of the lecture, turn off the camera, let Christy and Mark go, and anyone else? Okay.
One of the beliefs among politicians is that small government is better. We've got to cut the government back. But yet the studies show the population is happier, the rich included, with larger government, with government doing things that make quality of life better.
If you're a
So
Keynesian,
when you're working from the wrong beginning premises, we have the problems that we've got in the United States.
two challenges with that, because remember what John Maynard Keynes said. If investment exceeds savings, you have inflation, which increases the prices with no value. If savings exceeds investment, then you have recession. So where do you find that balance between the two? That's the big challenge. And where you get into problems with government is that thank you. When you get in trouble with government is that there's no incentive to be efficient sometimes, because they have no desire to make a profit, and that profit drives some of that efficiency. So I'm not saying it has to be all profit generated, but we can't just be lavishly spending on everything either. Exactly, that's the whole example right there, is that it's not our money, so we're not thinking about it. So within the other way, we have to think within that concept.
Social Security, Medicare, far more, quote, efficient than
Correct.
the public markets.
Correct, I don't want to get into this tonight, but if we got rid of all the insurance companies and extended Medicare to everybody and created a 310 million person risk pool, we'd save a heck of a lot more on health insurance. But that's another debatable point. I'm not going to bring it to another one.
This talk has been focused on the U.S., and what I've taken from it is that it's not as bad as it's
definitely not as bad. I hope you get that point, that we're not nearly as bad as it's
That's
always
nice.
proclaimed.
And I like the idea of moral capitalism. Is there with your knowledge and your background, is there a country or an area of the world that is a model citizen for moral capitalism and a kind of a good balance of?
Good question. For the most part, I would say Europe.
Yeah.
You know, many European countries, and this is gonna be part of the big debate because they say, oh, they're very socialist.
Yeah.
You know, especially with the conversation, they're redistributing wealth and income around. But I think part of that is there is a moral aspect, like we have in our country. The reason Medicare was started is elderly individuals could not get insurance because they were the most risky and sick population. So we created this because the market wasn't providing a service for those individuals. That was very moral of our country to take on that obligation. They provide a lot of those services. Some people say they go overboard, but I would say the United States has the aspect, but capitalism can be harsh. We're not complete capitalists. We have a lot of socialism in our country. Our defense is socialism. I don't own an aircraft carrier. You don't own an aircraft carrier. Altogether, we own an aircraft carrier which protects all of us. But if I have $1 million in wealth and you have $10,000 in wealth, is the defense doing more for me or more for you? You know, so that's a big part of it. So when I see it all the time, is people say, oh, I'm capitalist, we gotta have free markets, and then a few statements later, they'll say, oh, we gotta come in, we gotta regulate that. That's a challenge, you know, when you're talking out of both sides of your mouth with economic systems. You want to just be all free markets, but yet you want it to fix price. So that can be a challenge. But thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great